As a little girl, I always felt like I was in trouble. My home was a war zone, and I just remember feeling so very isolated. My stepfather was brutally abusive, always putting me in no-win situations. I have really very difficult memories of being locked in a hot car and not being let out till I was at the point of suffocation. I have memories of being forced to sit in a little rocking chair in our living room and not able to move, and needing to go to the bathroom and just being dared to not move out of that chair. And at the point where, as a little girl, you wet your pants and you don't know what to do. And my stepfather then had a reason to beat me. And I think it was his total intention to get power and control over me at a very young age. And he succeeded in doing that. And the abuse got more and more severe. There was verbal abuse and emotional abuse. And at a very young age, he would touch me. And that got more and more intense as I got older. I remember walking into kindergarten and looking around and knowing that no other little girl was going through what I was facing at home, and feeling those few moments of safety in school, but having to go home and face all the horrible abuse all over again. And I was never good enough, never had a moment where I felt like I was succeeding in life. And all of the abuse just intensified as my childhood years rolled on. My stepfather insisted that he would kill my mother if I ever breathed a word. So I had the total responsibility of her safety. So I took that threat very seriously. So the only time that I tried to tell her wasn't verbally, it was nonverbal. In fourth grade, well actually third grade, I took a bottle of vitamins thinking that that would do something to harm me. And of course the school teacher called my parents and they said, oh, she's just a very dramatic child. She's just looking for attention. And then got severely abused when I got home. And in fourth grade, I told the teacher that I had been raped. And then my parents again were called in and they were told that I just was watching too many soap operas and had picked that word up off the soap operas. As I was going through puberty, and my stepfather began to use condoms with me. So I would put the condoms in locations that my mother could find them, hoping that that would be a clue. So I never had the words, I never had the courage to open my mouth and tell my mother. I just tried in other ways that failed. And it was obvious that I was a little girl that was deeply wounded. It was obvious that I was hurting and feeling very isolated, and just this prison of pain that I felt there was no way out. I never felt like my mother would protect me. I never felt like she had the courage or the strength or the confidence to step in. There were many times that I was being physically, brutally beaten. One time particularly, my stepfather was holding my head in a toilet, holding my head underwater and screaming and beating me at the same time. And I can just remember hearing her from a distance screaming, you know, stop beating her. But she would never come into the room. She would never physically try to rescue me. And we would go to the beauty shop with her. That was her Thursday afternoon out. And the ladies at the beauty shop would comment on the stripes on my legs, and they would say, you know, why does she have these marks on her legs? And my mother said, you know, she's just a bad little girl, and her stepfather's just really strict. So she always had an answer for the outside world, and inside she just was in a place of denial where she would just try to turn the other way or try to justify that it wasn't really that bad, that the beatings and the abuse, that he really didn't mean it, and I just had to be a strong girl and just hold back my tears and just toughen up and just try to get through it. It wasn't enough that I felt like I was isolated in this prison of pain, but other kids would begin to make fun of me because if they were in the street playing kickball and the ball rolled in our yard, my stepfather would immediately take the ball. I wasn't allowed to go get the ball and throw it back to them. So in some way, the kids would blame me, and I just became this freak of a child because of the way my stepfather acted and treated other people. And it was extremely embarrassing. It was extremely hurtful that I was going through this hell inside my home, and then on the outside of my home, I became almost isolated in this freak kid that nobody really wanted to have anything to do with. And so it was extremely painful. And always wanting to be accepted and always wanted to be a part of the crowd, always wanted to take that step outside my yard and be invited to play in that kickball game. And instead I had to look from the other side, from that boundary that I was never allowed to cross. I really think that the imaginary world that I created became my solitude and almost my sanity, because in that world I knew that I could be anything I wanted to be. I know that I could create friends that would accept me. I knew I could play and just have a moment of peace. And even if it was imagination, it was something that brought me joy. I would wish for that happy family. I would want for somehow, some way for God to transform the family that I was in. And just took time to just live in that fantasy for a few minutes, and was always yelled at. Was always yelled at. When I was 15, I was determined that I was going to get out of this, that this was going to be the end. I could not continue being brutally abused day in and day out in what he was subjecting me to, because his fantasies were getting more and more warped, and my mother was getting more and more withdrawn. So at 15, I tried to find my biological father, who had left me as an infant, and concocted this plan to join the cheerleading squad and make it to a town just an hour up the road where my stepfather, where my biological father lived, and doing it in total secrecy. So it was really an act of Congress to get my stepfather to let me try out for the cheerleading squad and to let me kind of step outside the boundaries, the controlling boundaries he had set for me. But by the grace of God, I jumped higher than any other girl and did more flips and smiled bigger, and got on the cheerleading squad. And that summer we made it to a town just north of where we lived, about an hour away, for camp. And I snuck out in the middle of the night, and I found a phone booth and a phone book, and I called my biological father. And it was one of the most disappointing days of my life, because he met me, and there was no remorse for him leaving me. There was really no love in his eyes. There was just a coldness, and there was just a real disregard for any relationship as as father and daughter. So I just decided he was not going to be my deliverer. He was not going to be my rescue. And I went home even more defeated than I had been before. And so the abuse continued. So at 17, I decided, really, this is it. And my stepfather found out that I had snuck away and had found my biological father, and that angered him to a point of probably the worst beating I had ever received. And so that night, I snuck out of the house and stole the car and decided I was going to end my life, and surely thought 64 sleeping pills and a half a bottle of vodka would do it. But God had other plans. God had a different way. And I survived that night, and the next day I did disclose to my mother what had happened. And never in a million years, never, ever did I think that she would turn her back on me. But at that moment, she said, "You need to leave. You need to get out of my life." She accused me of being on drugs, accused me of trying to ruin her life. At the end of that day, she gave me a trash bag and about 10 minutes to pack my belongings. So I was on the street at 17. I really didn't trust God. I really kind of looked at my biological father left me, my stepfather abused me, so I always looked at God with this almost big stick, this wrath that was going to come upon me if I wasn't a perfect child. And I took responsibility for my sexual abuse. I felt like because I couldn't tell anybody it was my fault. I put that blame on myself, and I just felt like God didn't love me. And if He did love me, I thought He'll do something miraculous to deliver me. And so as a little girl, I'd pray and I'd pray and I'd pray, and things would get worse. And then I'd pray and I'd pray and I'd pray, and things would get worse. And then I'd try to find my biological father, and that blew up in my face. And then I tried to commit suicide, and I failed. And so I just felt very distant from God. I knew He was there. I had a reverence for God, but I just felt so distant. I just felt like I wasn't good enough. I just wasn't good enough for God to love me. I took all the responsibility on myself. I left 2 little sisters behind that I knew would face abuse. I felt responsibility for their safety. I had no idea what my mother was going to face after my disclosure. You know, that threat was still hanging there that she would be killed. I knew how brutally abusive he was, so I still had the burden of my family. Even though I was on the outside and I was free, I was still in bondage. There was no freedom when I knew that the family I loved was in extreme danger, and there was nothing I could do to protect them. The first day that I could attend to college, I was at the door waiting to move into the dorm, and that's where I lived for my first semester of college. And then when the dorm closed at the end of the semester, I lived in my car, and have a great heart for homeless people and what they go through. Have experienced taking the spit baths in the filling station bathroom and having everything you own in the car, but was very grateful to have a car. So those were very character building days for me, days when I truly felt I was facing the world alone, but had a great desire to rise above it. A great desire. And even when I was running from God, I knew He had His hand on me. I got very well acquainted with a bottle and very well acquainted with marijuana, and very well acquainted with anything that would numb my pain. Became very promiscuous for a season. Really didn't value my body or value the covenant and the precious gift of sex. Became very manipulative at that time, and just really had a hard time finding my way back to God. I really did. It was a tough season where the more sin I lived in, the more distance grew between God and I. When I was 18, I truly believe God put an angel in my life, and that's my husband of today. We've been married for 26 years. And we met as friends, and as our relationship, our feelings became stronger. I was adamant that he was too nice of a guy to have anything to do with me, and pushed him away for a lot of years, just saying, you just have no idea what I've been through, and you just don't want anything to do with me because I am bad news. So praise God, he persevered, and I think the more I pushed, the more he chased. But we were at a fraternity party, and he put his arms around me, and he said, I didn't mean to. I really did not mean to do this. And I said, what did you do? And he said, I fell in love with you, and I'll always love you. So I pushed for a few more months and finally just gave in and said, if you're willing, I'm willing, but I know it's not going to be an easy road, because I know how much anger I have pent up inside of me, and I don't know where to go with it, and I don't know what to do. So he just let me be me for the first few years of our marriage, and we had a very tumultuous time. I just wanted to see what button I would push to make him leave, because everyone in my life that I loved hurt me. And I just lumped him into that pile, and I said, eventually you'll leave. I know, I just have to figure out which button to push. And he pinned me down on the floor one day, and he said, when are you going to get it through your thick head that I am never going to leave you? And we could be miserable or we could be happy, but it really is your choice. So the light bulb went off. I thought, possibility, I could be happy. I don't know what that feels like. I don't know what that looks like. And so I think God was wooing me. I think there were songs, and I always loved Billy Graham, and it seems like every time I turned on the TV, there was Billy Graham giving me the message that God loved me. God just continued to speak to me through mentors and women, and I had an aunt and a grandmother who kept speaking the Word of God in me and praying for me. And it was just such a slow courtship, but one I am so grateful for. I am so grateful that God did not give up on me, and He kept loving me, and He kept wooing me. And my relationship with Jesus Christ is the most important relationship in my life today. I went on a sabbatical by myself on a whitewater rafting trip. And on that trip, I did business with God. I yelled at Him. I got angry. I cried harder than I've ever cried. I began to forgive. I think a big part of healing comes with forgiving God, because somehow you think God caused this. And understanding that it was God's, not ever God's will, it was man's choice to sin against me. So here I have been blaming God all this time. Forgiving myself because I couldn't open my mouth as a little girl and say what was happening to me. I couldn't even put into words what he was doing to me. Forgiving my perpetrator, forgiving my stepfather for the thousands of times he raped me, he did perverted things to me, to come to a place where I could truly release all of that resentfulness and all of that anger. Forgiving my mother for not being the mother that I deserved, that she should have been, and understanding that she had her own baggage and that hurting people hurt people, and that she is just a hurt person. And that place that I arrived that day, it was like someone had taken just bricks, just tons of bricks off my shoulders. And I left that river, I left that bridge, because that's really where the end of it was. I left that bridge and I said, God, I give it all to you. I give all this baggage, I give all this pain. More importantly, I give my life to you. You tell me what you want me to do. I have been a control freak. I have done everything Angela Williams has wanted to do my way, and it's not been the right way. And I just, right now, I declare you have all of me. You have my good, you have my bad, you have my joys, you have my tears, you have it all. And I left there on that drive home, I felt like $1,000,000. I felt like it was the first day of the rest of my life. But there were still times where I had to continue that forgiveness. You know, he says 70 times 70 for a reason. And there were times where I had to learn my worth, and that did not come from my job or from accolades or from performance. So I just had a lot of learning to do. It's like a toddler learning to walk. Learning how to walk with the Lord, and learning how to fall in love with this Jesus that I knew was in the process of doing a deep healing in my heart, and really learning how to listen, how to really hear His voice. So God spoke to my heart, and He told me that child sexual abuse is predictable and it's preventable. And it's time that this issue be brought into the public arena. And it's time that the voiceless have a voice. And it's time that we understand that there are survivors everywhere that need healing, and they need desperately for a ministry to reach out and to even give a platform, because I can never go back and recapture my childhood. Never. It's gone. I can't recapture that innocence that was lost, but I can protect the next generation of children by building an army that will help us. The mission of Voice Today is to break the silence and the cycle of child sexual abuse. And we do that in 3 ways. The first is awareness. We really have got to get people talking about the issue. It is so prevalent, it is a silent epidemic, and we've kept our heads buried in the sand too long. We teach prevention workshops. We feel very strongly that we need to educate a vigilant society so that they recognize, they first of all know how to protect a child and know how to prevent child sexual abuse, but they can recognize the signs when a child is in trouble. They can understand the process of disclosure and understand what resources are available to intervene and to help that child find safety. And then lastly, we provide healing resources. We currently run workshops, healing workshops. We have a support group and hope to facilitate support groups around the country. And we have a retreat that we hold for both men and women once a year for females, and next year we'll be hosting our first one for men. We have recently published Tough Talk to Tender Hearts, which is a phenomenal workshop because it actually helps adults understand how to teach their children about personal boundaries, how to teach their children about the threat of sexual abuse, and how to actually have the scripts of what to say. We are conditioned to have one talk at puberty about sex with our children, and the media is educating right now our children on sex. So this book gives adults comfort, and I say adults because it's just not parents that need to be protecting children. All adults need to protect children. Grandparents and aunts and uncles need to be involved in this process. So it teaches what a child should know developmentally at what age, and what you should be teaching your child, and how to layer those conversations, and how to find teachable moments to talk about sex and sexual boundaries. Our second book is Pathway to Healing, and that addresses just really the process of healing, the steps that you need to take to walk down that path. And we feel very strongly the first one is breaking the silence, because there's a tremendous amount of shame in that silence and in that secrecy that the victim imposes upon themselves. And we hope in all of our workshops that we can bring about a social change. One is that the stigma can be removed from the victim. Inadvertently, our society, when they take a disclosure or they find out you've been sexually abused, they'll say, well, why didn't you tell? Well, and just asking that question, that heaps the shame back on the victim. Or they may say, that happened a long time ago, aren't you over that yet? Or you really need to get over that. And we really need to educate society on how we can nurture survivors back to healing so they can live in that place of victory. And then the second social change is we really want to educate adults on prevention. We want them to be vigilant about protecting a child, and that comes through education. Right now, we wait for a child to disclose, and it's too late. The damage has been done. And I have adults tell me all the time, well, my child would tell me. And I want to say, well, when your child tells you, they have been traumatized. You know, it's really too late. So those are our goals. We really want to bring the subject into the public arena. We want to educate on prevention and healing, and we want to be a source for the subject. As a survivor of 14 years of sexual abuse, I just want to say that this was not your fault. That feeling of being damaged and being not normal and almost living in this dark cave, emotionally isolated, is not the place that God wants you to be. And if you're like me and you ran from God, you don't feel like you can even have a relationship with God, that is just a lie from the enemy. God loves you, and He never, ever wanted you to be abused and suffer what you've suffered. We would love to help you through this process. If you go to voicetoday.org, you can contact us there through our contact page, or you can even give us a call. All of our contact information is on our website. Again, that's voicetoday.org, and we would love to help you in any way that we can through your healing process.